Security will walk you out, he said flatly, like he was ordering room service. Didn't even lift his eyes from the tablet. My mouth went dry, but my hand moved before my brain did. I unpinned the badge from my lapel, the same one I'd worn since before this guy even knew what Sarbanes-Oxley meant, and set it down on the polished walnut boardroom table. The silence after that? You could have recorded it and sold it to meditation apps. It wasn't the fact that he fired me. Hell, that happens. It was the way he did it. Like my 2 decades of obsessive, airtight, regulation-proof infrastructure were a smudge on his quarterly roadmap. Like I was a forgotten appendix in his pitch deck. Across the table, the board's legal counsel, Harold, a man with 40 years of SEC nightmares behind his eyes, leaned in, squinted at the badge, flipped it over. He didn't blink. This badge is tied to Clause 14B, he said quietly. You just terminated your own key person for regulatory filings. For a second, the CEO froze, his thumb hovering over whatever Slack message or golf score he'd been so obsessed with. But then he waved his hand like it was just another bug to squash. We'll assign someone else, he muttered. Next item. Harold didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the badge like it was a live grenade. The room didn't breathe. Hey, real quick, if you're listening to this and not subscribed, go ahead and hit that button and give it a like. Only takes a second, and it keeps stories like this coming. Trust me, the team behind this appreciates it more than you know. Back to the bloodletting. The meeting ended without fanfare. No cake, no HR flowers. Just a 15-minute block on my calendar titled Org Change. When I left the building, no one looked up. But I saw one junior compliance officer at her desk, quietly pulling up the procedural map I'd written, her mouse hovering over a step labeled, "In case of key person removal, initiate holding protocol." Poor thing didn't even know what that meant. Yet. They'd told me to clear my things, but I didn't need a box. Everything that mattered was already off-site. The badge was symbolic, but the real key, that was buried 6 layers deep in a compliance structure none of them had bothered to understand. Because for them, governance was paperwork. For me, it was religion. See, when you work with global filings across 8 jurisdictions, you learn the dirty truth. Regulators don't trust logos. They trust names. And my name, R.D. Kessler, was the one printed beside every submission ID, every audit trail, every escalation clause tied to their legal standing as a functioning entity. They didn't just fire me. They unplugged the power supply and handed the battery to a guy who thought compliance was something you delegated to interns. That night, I went home, made tea, and opened the private console I hadn't touched in 3 years. The one tied to the dormant LLC I'd quietly registered back when they asked me to start certifying overseas documents through a personal authentication chain, because it was faster than corporate. Back then, they'd loved my initiative. Now that little sidecar LLC, still valid, still mine, still clean, was suddenly very, very interesting. I toggled a switch labeled Key Person Transition Trigger. Then I drafted 3 letters: formal, neutral, cold, to the SEC, the FCA, and the BaFin. Subject: governance notification, removal of designated officer without protocol transition. Each letter was signed. Rebecca D. Kessler, former director, regulatory infrastructure, compliance custodian, Clause 14B, authority. By the time the board realized what had happened, they'd be getting questions. By the time the regulators caught up, they'd be getting freezes. And by the time someone at HQ tried to refresh our most basic filings, they'd see a red banner at the top of the dashboard. This system requires an authorized key person credential for updates. None detected. I wasn't angry. I was methodical, because governance isn't a document. It's a chain of trust, and they just cut theirs loose. You ever seen someone get fired like it's a sneeze? That's what it felt like. Casual, forgettable, involuntary. I walked into that conference room thinking we were going to review the updated risk assessment for Q4. Instead, HR was waiting like undertakers with clipboards. Due to reorganization, your role is being sunsetted. Sunsetted. Like I was a damn screensaver. They read it like they'd practiced it in the mirror all morning, and maybe they had. A script. Monotone. Eyes glazed. HR flanked by 2 security guards who looked like they got lost on the way to a warehouse. And there he was again, The CEO, Mr. Portfolio Optimization. Still scrolling that stupid tablet, probably shopping for ergonomic golf tees while my career got flatlined across the walnut table. I didn't argue, didn't stammer, didn't give them the dignity of surprise. I just reached up, unclipped the badge, and set it down in front of them with a quiet click. Harold, the board's lawyer, leaned in. His tie caught the edge of his coffee. He didn't notice. He was focused on the badge, flipped it over, paused. Then something in his face shifted. Not panic. Harold didn't panic, but recognition. The kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. "This is tied to clause 14B, he muttered, barely above a whisper, like a priest remembering a line from a funeral rite he hadn't used in years. No one else heard him. HR was already stacking my severance folder on top of their laptops like it was a done deal. Security motioned toward the door. I ignored them, just nodded once to Harold, then turned and walked out. Clause 14B. That wasn't just some bureaucratic footnote. That clause defined the governance designation protocol for all high-value regulatory signatories. You don't just sunset that. You don't sunset the person whose credentials are embedded into every cross-border compliance submission you've made for the last 12 years. But they didn't know that, because I'd made it invisible on purpose, not to hide it. Hell no, to protect it. To make sure that governance didn't become a casualty of whatever reorg du jour some banker's CEO wanted to roll through to juice the stock price. Back at my apartment, I opened the encrypted terminal, logged into the CertLink ledger I'd helped design in 2017, an unassuming little platform used for international filings. The login screen still showed my name in the footer, system designed and maintained by R.D. Kessler. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Dashboards that hadn't needed my attention in months suddenly pinged yellow. Status. Revocation review triggered. 3 jurisdictional nodes had already detected a credential disruption. Germany, UK, Singapore, all flagged. Key person invalidated. Submission path suspended. I leaned back, watching it all unfold like a slow-moving domino fall. Not dramatic, not noisy, just exact. There's a myth in business that everything breaks loudly. That's a lie. The worst failures don't explode. They expire. Quietly, elegantly, like lungs after one last breath. They thought governance was a department. They forgot it was a designation. And mine was woven through every node in the system. I wasn't going to sue. I wasn't going to march back in with a lawyer and demand my desk. I was going to wait. Because while they were figuring out who to hand my sunsetted duties to, the regulators would already be sending inquiries. And I knew exactly what they'd find when they searched the registry. Key person, Kessler, Rebecca D., verified. No replacement on file. Authority suspended. No screaming. No press release, just procedural death by omission. They hadn't removed me. They'd removed their own ability to legally function. And they didn't even know it yet. That night, the city outside my window pulsed with its usual indifference. Horns, sirens, the occasional drunk laughter bouncing off glass. Meanwhile, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, laptop perched on a crate that doubled as a coffee table, a half-empty cup of cold tea at my side. The badge was gone, but my access? That ran deeper than any HR revocation form could reach. I booted up the private console, one of those legacy admin tools they'd forgotten even existed. It wasn't sexy. No slick UI, just raw fields, command lines, and multi-region tunnels. My fingers moved like muscle memory. Navigate, authenticate, 2-factor through my hardware token. Then I began flagging. System by system, dashboard by dashboard. Flagged. Governance review required. Authority disrupted. Each region had its own color code. The moment I updated the North American compliance node, a yellow marker pulsed beside the timestamp. I knew it would trigger a back-end notification at the SEC's Integrated Submissions Tracker, just like I designed it. Europe, next, then APAC. Singapore's mass system was the quickest to respond. Designated key person revoked. Reauthorization needed before filing access can resume. It was so clean, so quiet, just like I'd always intended, because when things fall apart in compliance, you don't want alarms. You want traceability, timestamps, clarity. Next, the letters. 3 regulators, 3 time zones. Typed carefully, each word pulled from decades of precise, boring, bulletproof language. To whom it may concern, as of today's date, I have been involuntarily removed from my role as Director of Regulatory Infrastructure at Redacted. As the registered key person for this entity's filings across your jurisdiction, I am notifying you that no transitional designee was appointed, nor was a continuity protocol executed under Clause 14b. Per governance procedure, this initiates a reset status. Please update your registry accordingly. Sincerely, Rebecca D. Kessler, Kessler Governance Lendhard Authorized Signatory, G14B Compliance Chain. I signed each digitally with my encrypted private key, still certified, still active, still trusted by every major filings portal we touched since 2015. Then came the part I'd almost forgotten, the portal. Every one of our international submission paths had been registered under the same certificate authority, my LLC, a dormant little shell company I'd spun up years ago for continuity coverage. Back then, the board had balked at the bureaucracy of getting the corporate entity credentialed across multiple sovereign systems, so they let me do it personally, just temporarily, because I could fast-track it through my network. And like most temporary things in business, it became permanent. Now, Kessler Governance Lahated, long ignored, quietly lit up like a Christmas tree. My filings console burst to life as auto-notifications poured in, credential requests, certificate queries, jurisdictional echo pings. It was like I'd flipped a switch in the dark and watched the entire underground system blink back. I opened the LLC's dashboard, checked the status of the submission certificates, all still valid, all still active, all still mine. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. You don't burn down a house for having the wrong owner, you just change the locks. And that's what I'd done. Their entire legal capacity to communicate with financial regulators now funneled through systems tied to credentials they no longer controlled, because they never bothered to transition anything, because they assumed control was loud, obvious, hierarchical. They didn't understand that the most powerful roles are often buried in the footnotes, and footnotes are where I live. Within 24 hours, 3 automated responses landed in my inbox. From the FCA, registry updated, key person removed, compliance path disabled. From BaFin, submission rights suspended pending governance assignment. From the SEC, acknowledged, please submit designee credentials for review. I didn't smile. I archived the emails and stood up slowly, stretching my back. The machine was still running, but they just ejected the person who held the kill switch. I didn't have to push it. I just had to wait. They posted about it on LinkedIn. Our org chart just got leaner, sharper, future-ready, read the CEO's post, sandwiched between a champagne glass emoji and a quote he definitely didn't understand. The comments section was filled with bootlickers congratulating the bold transformation, clapping like trained seals at a SeaWorld show. Not a single mention of governance or filings or, legality. While they high-fived each other into delusion, I went to work. I opened the public audit portal I'd built in 2019, an internal transparency tool that leadership had completely ignored because it didn't drive engagement. Of course it didn't. It drove accountability. Then I uploaded every filing I had ever submitted on behalf of the company. 8 international entities, 11 jurisdictions, over 300 forms, each document, annotated in plain English, time-stamped to the millisecond, cross-signed with external witness logs, all scrubbed clean of anything proprietary, but leaving one thing very visible, the required signature line. At the bottom of every single document, in pale gray Helvetica, filed by R.D. Kessler, G14B Authority. This wasn't a hit piece, it wasn't a manifesto, it was a ledger, proof of function, proof of continuity. Proof that, without me, those filings were just decorative PDFs with no legal force behind them. I emailed the link to the full public archive to one person, the interim general counsel, Anna. She'd always been sharp. Back when I'd helped her clean up a subsidiary licensing mess in Italy, she'd told me, "You don't talk much, but your folders are louder than most executives." I figured she deserved the courtesy. Subject. For reference, governance ledger. Body. As the former key person of record, I am providing the archive of all active jurisdictional filings submitted under G14B authority. Please advise if you intend to pursue reassignment protocol. Otherwise, No updates can proceed. Signature, R.D. Kessler. Title, Managing Director, Kessler Governance Limited. No threats, no shade, just process. Meanwhile, I set a passive tracker on the portal. I wasn't spying. I just wanted to see who'd realize what they were missing. First ping came from someone in finance. They downloaded the 2022 Q3 BaFin submission. 5 minutes later, the system pinged a second time. Attempted edit. Failure, credential mismatch, then legal, then internal audit. One by one, they came. Clicked, tried, failed. Because none of them had the authority chain embedded in their digital keys. The system rejected every single attempt with the same message. Error, signature verification failed. G14B key person not detected. They'd built their empire on autopilot, thinking the filings maintained themselves. But filings aren't passive. They're living documents, constantly refreshed, reaffirmed, updated. And without the verified signature, they were legally stale. I didn't need to tell the regulators. I already had. I didn't need to call the board. Their logs would do that for me. What I did do, quietly, without fanfare, was loop in 2 compliance officers from competitor firms I'd consulted with over the years. Sent them the same archive. For educational reference, I wrote, a model for continuity documentation. You could feel the shiver move through the ecosystem. My inbox stayed quiet, but the metadata lit up like a Christmas tree. 10 unique IP addresses, 27 form views, 7 failed edit attempts. That's when I knew the wheels had started turning inside HQ, not because they understood what they'd lost, but because now they couldn't fake it. They'd try to draft a replacement protocol, assign some VP with an MBA and a pulse, but the regulators wouldn't accept it. Not without an endorsement chain, not without a compliance narrative, not without me. And the documents? Those PDFs were more than forms. They were footprints, trails of institutional memory, signed in ink that didn't dry unless I said so. I didn't build them to be weapons, but I damn well built them to be immutable. By the end of the week, the archive had legs. It started as a whisper in a Slack thread, someone at a fintech startup forwarding the link with the caption, "Holy hell, this is how you document compliance." Then it hit Reddit, buried in a thread about governance disasters, where some anonymous user called it a masterpiece of preventative collapse. They didn't even know what they were looking at, just sensed it was rare, precise, unusual in how calm it was. Then came the emails. Hi, Rebecca. Would love to connect if you're open to advisory work. The structure in your filings archive is the cleanest I've seen in years. I'm a compliance director at Redacted. How did you manage multi-jurisdictional submission tracking with that level of continuity? Is this something you teach? It felt surreal, watching the system I built, silently, diligently, often after hours and without applause, become an artifact. But inside my former company, the silence was different. They'd begun trying to backfill the submission calendar. That was clear from the flurry of back-end pings I tracked. Failed logins, flagged attempts to regenerate certificates, a curious uptick in internal traffic to the old procedural wiki I'd written 6 compliance officers ago. Someone tried to update the Q3 SE key filing, a basic form, nothing exotic, but the system kicked it back. Error 403, missing authorized key person credentials, filing path disabled. Another tried to resubmit the Q2 BaFin update, same result. They tried bypassing the console. They tried using an old sandboxed signature from a junior officer in Luxembourg. No dice. Why? Because none of their credentials were embedded in the current G14B chain of custody, because that chain lived in 2 places, a registry that hadn't been touched in over a year, and me. I didn't write the system to be exclusive. I wrote it to be correct. But correct doesn't care who's in charge. By Thursday, the board was asking questions. I know this not because anyone contacted me, but because someone from procurement, of all places, sent me an accidental calendar invite titled Board Governance Access Discussion. Kessler? 15 minutes later, it was revoked, but it was too late. Meanwhile, someone finally did the one thing I'd been waiting for. They checked the SEC's public registry. Search. Key person. Company name. Result. Kessler, Rebecca D., verified contact for all multi-jurisdictional filings. Last update, 13 months ago. Current status, no successor filed. That little entry caused more panic than a data breach, because now it wasn't just internal systems flagging them, it was public infrastructure. They were exposed. Imagine trying to convince an investor you're audit ready when your compliance chain still points to the woman you fired 2 weeks ago without a transitional memo. Internally, they must have been scrambling. I could picture it. Junior analysts flipping through my old protocol binders like they were deciphering ancient ruins. Some VP of risk arguing that surely the system could be overridden. But you can't override trust, and every node I'd built was programmed to reject unverified substitutions. If you want to change the key person, you don't just fill out a form. You file a governance declaration with regulators, with proof of knowledge transfer, with co-signatures, and they had none of that. Because they hadn't even realized they needed it. They'd sunset me like a piece of software, forgetting that I was the bridge between software and sovereignty, between spreadsheets and state recognition. And the worst part for them? They couldn't fake their way out of it. Not this time. Not with the filings floating in the wild, stamped and signed and watermarked with my name. The next day, I got a ping from the registry's auto monitor. Someone had attempted to file a transitional declaration using a generic corporate account. Rejected. No successor. No Kessler countersignature. No dice. I forwarded the rejection to my archive. Just a personal note to self. System holding. Pressure rising. And still, no one had picked up the phone. They always say the money doesn't lie. Turns out, neither do Fortune 100 legal teams when their capital's on the line. I was on my second cup of coffee and halfway through rebuilding a flowchart for a new client, one that had read their governance charter when the email came in. Subject line, request for regulatory continuity confirmation, urgent. Sender, Senior Counsel, Regulatory Assurance Division, redacted Fortune 100 partner. Body, we've recently been informed that the designated key person on record for my former company was removed without a succession filing. Our pending 92-nanometer partnership agreement requires verified compliance continuity under multi-jurisdictional governance clauses. Internal research indicates you are the only certified authority on record. Can you confirm your current standing and whether a regulatory reassignment has been approved per applicable filings protocol? They didn't even bother copying anyone from my old company. But they did CC external counsel and 2 risk officers. I sat back, hands steepled under my chin, rereading the message, not twice, 4 times, because there it was, the bottleneck, not just technical, not theoretical, financial, active, ticking. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. This wasn't vindication. It was inevitability. They'd built the whole partnership pitch on data flow, regulatory transparency, and frictionless jurisdictional compliance. Those were their words. But they'd never bothered to ask how the compliance stayed frictionless. Spoiler, it was me. My reply was short, cordial, professional. Attached was a scanned PDF, page 38 from our old internal bylaws, still in effect, still legally binding, highlighted in yellow. Clause 14b. Removal of the designated key person without prior written authorization and transitional filing approval shall immediately void the legal standing of all associated compliance submissions until reassignment is approved by applicable external regulatory bodies. I added 1 sentence. At this time, I am not aware of any authorized reassignment or transitional protocol executed by the company. I have received no requests for the credential transfer or procedural succession. Signed, Rebecca D. Kessler, Managing Director, Kessler Governance Limited. The reply came within hours. Not from the same counsel, this time from their counterpart at the partner firm's external law group. Appreciate the clarity, Ms. Kessler. In light of this information, we have advised our client to pause closing proceedings pending written confirmation of regulatory continuity from the originating entity. We will also notify our audit and risk oversight team. Translated, the 90 million dollars was on ice. The call I didn't hear but knew happened? That was the CFO's voice cracking while trying to explain how a compliance officer they let go to cut costs just froze their biggest transaction of the quarter. I imagined someone pulling up my ledger, scrolling past the timestamps, the filings, the documents they couldn't even open now, and realizing they'd fired the only person who knew where the legal tripwires were buried. That evening, my phone buzzed. Not a number I recognized, not local. I let it ring. They didn't leave a voicemail, but 10 minutes later, I got another email, this one from someone new, Director of Strategic Partnerships. Also CCing a C-suite name I hadn't seen in years. Rebecca, hoping we can schedule a time to connect regarding a potential compliance transition framework. We understand you may still have access to essential certifications relevant to our current reporting obligations. No apology, no explanation, but now they were asking. Not demanding, not assuming. That's when I knew the bottleneck had gone from theoretical to tactical. This wasn't about pride anymore, it was about survival. And the path forward, it went straight through me, not because I wanted it, but because I'd made sure no one else could fake it. The emergency Zoom was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp, but I joined at 8:03. Let them wait. Let the sweat bead, let the silence breathe. The screen lit up with the usual Brady Bunch grid of uncomfortable suits. A few board members, general counsel, 2 junior compliance leads who looked like they'd slept in the office, and then him, Mr. Tablet, now CEO in name only, face pale and drawn like someone finally realizing the iceberg wasn't just theoretical. He didn't speak at first. Harold, their longtime legal counsel, sat beside him, brow furrowed, holding a thick binder. The kind only lawyers carry when they know they missed something and don't want to admit it until they found the exact clause that proves it. I stayed silent. Just adjusted my mic and waited. Harold leaned in and whispered something to the CEO. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that expression before. When people realize the fine print they signed in confidence now has teeth. The CEO finally looked up. We believe there's been a misunderstanding about your role, Ms. Kessler. I gave a polite smile. There hasn't. More silence. He blinked. Your response to the Fortune partner, was that necessary? You mean confirming the truth? I asked. That you removed a legally designated key person without executing a transition filing. Someone on the call exhaled a little too loudly. I clicked a window on my screen and shared it. A single-page PDF filled the view. Let's not dwell on what went wrong. Here's what can still be made right, I said. At the top, licensing framework for delegated G14B compliance authority. Bullet points. Temporary licensing of credentials via Kessler Governance Limited. Jurisdiction-specific scope only. Renewable every 6 months. Full audit trail embedded. Requires acknowledgement of previous procedural disruption. The document didn't ask for reinstatement. It didn't demand apologies. It offered continuity, clean, neutral, legal. They could sidestep embarrassment if they signed fast. But I wouldn't budge on the terms. Because this wasn't about me coming back. It was about them finally understanding that compliance wasn't a staff position. It was a spine. One they'd snapped without checking what nerves it connected to. I'm not interested in employment, I said flatly. I'm offering infrastructure. The board chair, previously quiet in the bottom left square, cleared her throat. So this is a private license arrangement? Yes, I said. One you already pre-approved technically. Section 5.2 of your compliance charter allows for third-party delegated authority, provided they're previously vetted and the chain of custody is uninterrupted. She blinked. Which, in this case, it is, I continued, since no formal transition occurred, meaning I still hold the original certification path. So legally, you're not breaking protocol. You're just formalizing continuity. More silence. Then Harold spoke, softly. She's right. No one argued, not even the CEO, especially not him. He stared at the screen like it was a mirror he didn't like looking into, because what I'd done wasn't sabotage, wasn't revenge. It was governance, executed exactly the way they signed off on it. They didn't lose their compliance chain because I acted out. They lost it because I followed their rules better than they understood them. And now, the only way forward was to license the very thing they tried to erase. Me. By the time Q3 earnings rolled around, the air inside that company must have been thick enough to chew. Investor calls that used to feel like a victory laps turned into forensic interrogations. I listened to one. They forgot to disable public access to the webcast link, and it was brutal. You could hear the fear under every scripted answer. Questions came fast. Can you confirm regulatory continuity across all jurisdictions? Has the key person designation been updated with the SEC? Why are 2 of your filings now marked pending resubmission? They danced around the truth like it was on fire. Meanwhile, revenue slipped just enough to make everyone nervous, but not enough to explain the growing tension. The real problem wasn't dollars, it was trust. Partners wanted black and white proof that someone was still behind the regulatory wheel, and every time they asked for it, the company handed them a brick wrapped in a buzzword. Behind the scenes, I heard from an old contact at the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Friendly voice, tired tone. We just flagged their last submission attempt. No authorized signature. It's suspended until resolved. And then, the line that said it all, let us know if you're advising elsewhere. We'll adjust accordingly. Because by then, I was. Two competitors, one mid-sized fintech with global expansion goals, one legacy player with a reputation for over-documenting everything, had quietly contracted my services. I didn't advertise. I didn't reach out. They found the filings archive. They saw the signature. They knew. Now they had my new credentials, my new compliance flowcharts, my signature embedded in their systems, and they made it known, politely, but publicly, that they had zero concerns about regulatory continuity, because they'd brought in someone who read the footnotes. Back at my old company, desperation started leaking out the edges. I saw it in email subject lines forwarded to me by people still on the inside. Urgent compliance workflow needed. Escalation. Key person path unresolved. Board advisory. Licensing options. They wanted a shortcut. A workaround. Anything but the licensing sheet I'd already handed them on that Zoom call like a gift wrapped in precision. Then came the call. It wasn't meant to reach me. A senior systems analyst accidentally recorded it and sent me the transcript, probably thinking he'd never need to use it. The CEO's voice came through, tight and cracking. Can we fix this? The CFO didn't hesitate. Not without signing her licensing sheet. Her. Not Rebecca, not Kessler, just her, as if even saying my name now carried legal weight. That was the sound of reckoning, not a crash, but a cornered silence. A man realizing the board was watching, the investors were listening, and the regulators had stopped taking their calls. Their systems worked. Their documents looked fine, but none of it counted. It was all surface without signature. 1 week later, the German filings portal rejected their Q4 projection submission. Reason: invalid to credential pathway. Prior authorization revoked. Resubmit with active key person certification. And the kicker? Their biggest international partner, 36 Samlers in annual revenue, put their renewal under internal review. Translated, they smelled smoke. I didn't gloat. I didn't spike the ball. I just updated my license tracking dashboard, added a new field. Legacy entity, status frozen pending signature. Because this was no longer about hurt feelings or power struggles. It was about the chain of trust, and their link was broken. The year-end compliance briefing wasn't live-streamed. No investors watching, no public fanfare. Just a closed-door meeting in a windowless boardroom with bad coffee and worse energy. But I had a transcript within the hour. Corporate has a way of leaking when fear outweighs loyalty. The general counsel, Harold, steady as ever, finally said it out loud. Not with drama, not with regret, just fact. Kessler owns the only valid credentials for our class of filings. You could almost hear the room exhale. The thing they'd been tiptoeing around for months had a name again, a shape, a solution. They didn't even call me, just signed the framework I'd sent weeks ago. Every clause, every control, no edits. Licensing agreement for G14B compliance operations, audit access embedded, attribution permanent, recertification checkpoints every 6 months. No employment, no org chart, just a service contract that tethered their legal standing to the signature they once tried to erase. I didn't gloat. I didn't renegotiate. I didn't raise the price. I just countersigned and sent it back with a subject line that read, effective immediately, governance restored. No emojis, no smiley face, just black text on white. A week later, they updated their website, quietly, no press release. But it was there. Tucked into the bottom corner of the compliance page in pale gray text most users would never notice. Regulatory filings certified via Kessler Governance Limited. No link, no photo. Just a name. Mine, acting as the foundation under their public trust. I had no title, no office, no team. But when the next audit season came, they sent over the packets. Organized, sheepish, already formatted to my preferred review style. When a regulator had a question, it came to me first. When a partner needed a verification chain, I was the endpoint. They called it a new normal. I called it precision. They thought they could delete a title. Instead, they outsourced the backbone of their legitimacy, and now they pay for every signature.